So just real quick, just because our guest speakers will be doing a lot of talking, Joanne, I wonder if, first off, welcome, Joanne. I wonder if we can do a quick sound check with you to make certain you're good and audible there.
Hi, good afternoon. How do I sound?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Great.
And Matt, how about the same with you, just to be sure?
Good afternoon. Hopefully you can hear me well.
Perfect. Thank you both. We'll be with you shortly. Hello, Ms. McClellan.
Hey, Bob. Um, my new laptop, for whatever reason, can't do WebEx, so I had to go back to my old one.
Okay, very good. So just a quick reminder, everybody, we are live streaming as a public meeting, and our meeting is also being recorded. We'll ask everybody to stay on mute as soon as our chair joins us, we'll go ahead and get started probably in just a moment or so, okay? Thank you all so much. Chair Patelli, I just wanted to check in and looks like you've been able to join us.
Yes, thank you. It's for some reason it's taking a long time kind of spinning, so apologize for that.
Understand. Well, Madam Chair, we have our unanimous attendance by our voting membership. I would recommend that we, unless Stephen, your executive director, sees any reason not to, that we go ahead and start up our meeting.
Wonderful, wonderful. And give me 1 second here. Okay. Did we already, let's go ahead and start the roll call?
Yes, before we do that, Madam Chair, if I may, I just do need to read a little bit into the record here. I beg for everybody's forgiveness on this, but first off, welcome to the Southside Network Authority meeting. I'm really excited about the conversation and discussion we're going to have today. Before I read in the electronic meeting item, just a couple of quick reminders. Today's meeting is a public meeting. We are live streaming the meeting so that our public is able to view our conversation and stay informed on our project. And of course, we are recording, which helps us as a government entity to prepare accurate minutes of our conversations today. Do want to stress that pursuant to the declared state of emergency in the Commonwealth of Virginia in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of authority members, staff, and the general public, that today's meeting is being held electronically via WebEx. These electronic meetings are required to complete essential business on behalf of our region. Per the requirements of the Code of Virginia, we posted today's meeting notice, agenda, and supporting documentation on our website for public review. We also provided electronic copies of this information to our authority members and other interested parties. Today's meeting, again, is being live streamed and is available for viewing on our Regional Connection YouTube channel. The meeting is also being recorded and will be available after the meeting through our HRPDC website. Members of the public were invited to submit comments to the authority in advance of today's meeting via email and phone call, and no public comments were received in advance of today's meeting. Just a couple reminders before we begin today's meeting. We ask that all participants remain on mute with their phones and computers until they are providing input, and of course called upon by Ms. Vitelli as the chair of the authority. After speaking, please remember to go back on mute. Please identify yourself when speaking by providing your name and locality or agency. And the same, if you were to make a motion or a second, we ask that you state your name as well. And as a reminder, we do have to do all votes today via roll call. With that, Madam Chair, I want to thank you and the board members for your hard work on behalf of our region. I will turn it back over to you, Madam Chair, to call our meeting to order.
Well, thank you, Mr. Crum. This meeting, the Network Authority Board is now in order. And I want to thank everybody for joining today and echo what Mr. Crum said, especially our partners in this, CTC. Joanne, it's great to see you and Matt on the call, and all of your team members that have worked so hard on this project with us. We appreciate that. As there were no public comments, confirming that, Mr. Crum, there was no public comments, correct?
There are no public comments. Madam Chair, I will need to call the roll of our authority members and guests.
Yes, please. Go ahead and call the roll then.
Very good. From the City of Chesapeake, Susan Vitale. Ms. Vitale?
Here.
Oh, sorry about that. That was me. From the City of Norfolk, Ms. McClellan.
Present.
Thank you. From the City of Portsmouth, Mr. Jones.
Here.
From the City of Suffolk, Mr. Moore.
Here.
From the City of Virginia Beach, Ms. Wilson.
Here.
So we have unanimous attendance from all of our voting members. I'd like to call the alternate members. From the City of Chesapeake, Ms. Fairholm, or Mr. Fairholm.
Here.
From the City of Norfolk, Ms. Weitzel.
Hey, Bob, I think Frazier is on, but Catherine was not able to attend.
Very good. And Frazier, I'll get to you in a moment, sir. Continuing with our alternate members, let's go to the City of Portsmouth, Mr. Pace. From the City of Suffolk, I believe we have Ms. Chandler.
Present.
Thank you, Regina. And from Virginia Beach, do we have Mr. Wallace?
Here.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, a few other people that I want to call upon as I go down through the list, just to make certain we know who all is with us today. From the City of Norfolk, Frazier Picard, CIO. Frazier, you with us today?
Present.
From CTC, who you'll get to meet and get to work with a lot this afternoon, Ms. Joanne Hovis.
I am here.
Very good. And Mr. Matt DeHaven.
I'm here. Good afternoon.
Let's see. We have some legal counsels. Mr. Stroman.
Good afternoon.
Fantastic. Carla Carter.
Present.
And Carla is with the City of Suffolk. Thank you, Carla. Our legal counsel for the authority, Mr. Mike Lockaby. Very good. And Madam Chair, can I ask, I'm looking quickly, have I missed anybody that's on the call that would like to introduce themselves?
Hey, Bob, this is Andrew Fox, legal counsel from Norfolk.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andy. Anyone else? Great. Madam Chair, I'll turn that back over to you.
All right, great. Thank you very much. We have meeting minutes, and that attachment 4. I believe we need to go ahead and approve those minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Roll call vote.
Madam Chair, and I beg your forgiveness, but a friendly amendment, could we accept the agenda and approve the meeting minutes in one motion and second? And that's my error, Madam Chair. I should have caught that.
No, that's a good idea. So could we amend that, Ms. McClellan? Would you provide the motion for both?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to amend my motion to approve both the minutes from the last meeting and the agenda presented for today.
All right. And Mr. Jones?
I will confirm my second again.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Crum. Vote, please.
Yes, Ms. Vitale.
Yes.
Ms. McClellan.
Yes.
Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
And Ms. Wilson.
I think Peter was in my place on at the last meeting. So I've stayed on the minutes and yes, on the agenda.
Very good. Thank you so much. Madam Chair, the motion carries.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So we are at that point that, the kind of administrative part of our meeting is passed. And now we're on to the meat of what we're here to do today. And I have to tell you, I've been looking forward to this for a very long time. So I am really thrilled to have Joanne here with CTC. We've had the pleasure of talking previously, and it's great to have such a wonderful, qualified team that is helping us with this and leading us down this incredible path and journey that we're on. So I will go ahead and is it Matt going to go first, or Joanne? Do you want to kick it off? Which would you prefer?
If I may just start.
Oh, go ahead, Jan. I'll turn it over to you.
Matt and I are competing with each other for of your attention.
No competition at all. I'll defer to you, Joanne. I'm going to get the slides up on the screen here.
Great. Thank you, Matt. I think, what we will do is, if I can just give you some very simple introductory remarks, and then I'll turn over to Matt to share his insights and the fruits of the considerable work that he's been doing with his team, and thoughts on that. And then we'll come back to me after he speaks to the business case, and we'll try to place all of that into a broader context about broadband in the United States, and in particular in the Hampton Roads area, where we think the need is, what some of the strategic alternatives are, and what the considerations are with regard to those strategic alternatives. And let me just say, as an introductory matter, we are really delighted to have this opportunity to spend so much time with all of you and to share some ideas and to get your input and your guidance and your feedback, which is the critical piece of this kind of workshop. And we really do envision it as a workshop that we are thinking through a range of different kinds of issues, and hearing your priorities and concerns and goals. Like, much of what will come out of this is guidance to us in that regard. And so I look forward to that back and forth and that kind of collaborative element as we go through this work. Matt, will you go to the first slide, please? So Matt, as I said, is going to speak to the work that's been done so far in the context of the goals and the vision. And then we'll speak through, he'll speak to the business case analysis and the data that he's developed so far, and how it plays out in helping you to understand the financial parameters of the effort that is in. And then I will take it from there in talking about different kinds of models for the effort itself, and what we've seen around the country, what we would consider best practices, consideration of risk, reward, and opportunity, and so on. And that is our plan for the next couple of hours. So that overall picture in place, let me hand it to Matt.
Yeah, I think we can come back to the first slides there on the overall overarching goals, because I think that's going to lead nicely into discussions around business models. But let me start with some work that we did looking at a particular business case around the construction of the regional connectivity ring. And looking at that business case purely from the perspective of meeting internal needs and cost avoidance. In other words, not making assumptions about potential revenues or even future objectives for new applications really on the network, but simply looking at what costs today are the 5 cities expending on connectivity that a regional fiber network ring would be able to supplant. And really, those costs fall into two main categories. Costs around internet connectivity, for which you pay both a commodity piece for the capacity, but also a transport from commercial telecommunications providers. And also connectivity to local data centers, where the providers like Amazon Web Services and Outlook 365, where their servers sit, and you need access to as your communities move their IT operations more and more into what we call cloud-based services, simply meaning they're hosted someplace other than in your own data centers and facilities, which has been traditionally more and more the case. We're simply, the trend is dramatically moving in the other direction towards the cloud-based services. So with that, we start by looking, and this is a bit of a review and an expansion on our meeting last month, where we looked at some of the capital costs associated, or essentially all of the capital costs associated with the construction of the network. But the construction of fiber and conduit in the ground doesn't give you a network that does anything. So I'm going to walk you through very quickly all of the cost inputs around building a network that has all of that capacity for a wide range of purposes, but that also has the network equipment and the operational support around delivering those internal regional connectivity services, both for internet and data center connectivity, and potentially even jurisdiction to jurisdiction connectivity for specific applications related to regional public safety, collaboration, and interoperability. The list of things you could potentially do are wide-ranging. Disaster recovery, those types of things. So let's look at what those operating costs consist of first. Kind of starting at the lowest level of the network, the conduit and the dark fiber. You're going to, as a fiber owner, for the first time, really be exposed to these new types of costs. You're going to be a utility owner that is responsible for responding to utility 811 locate tickets, which are, it's part of the state law requirements around, legal requirements around protecting underground infrastructure. And so as other excavators are digging, they issue tickets as to where they're going to be. And it's a matter of preventive maintenance for you to be out there and help identify where your conduit is to prevent inadvertent damage to that. It's obviously a great thing to do, but it comes at a cost, because it's an ongoing and to some degree variable cost, depending on what type of construction is happening in the region that you really just don't have control of, but you need to budget carefully for that. And we have a lot of data around what those kinds of costs look like on average on an annual basis. Also, you'll be in the public rights of way, some of which your stakeholders own and control, and in other cases, particularly with state roadways, you don't. And you'll occasionally have requirements to relocate conduit segments due to road widenings and things of that nature. Of course, repairs are something we always have to budget for, that you can go a couple of years without a break and then have a bad season, whether it be related to natural disasters or simply lots of ongoing construction in a particular area. So repairs are something that we've been able to quantify again with data over the years. And then, of course, maintaining good documentation of that network and what the uses of the strands of fiber are. Those very important tasks, both for maintenance purposes and as you move potentially into a model in which you're using some of that capacity for revenue generation. It's very important to understand what each fiber strand is being used for and by whom. But then we add to that a layer around network operations and maintenance for network electronics. And I'll get into a bit of what that consists of. But on the operating side, we consider the network maintenance contracts for the electronics, contracted engineering and technician support to provide day-to-day oversight and configuration changes of the network electronics, optimizing it, making changes as needed to support new applications, that sort of thing. Network operations center services are another component of that, which includes essentially outsourced day-to-day status monitoring of the equipment, and it becomes the entry point for trouble tickets and for dispatching your engineering services when you need support. And then we built into that the operating models as well, funded depreciation with the assumption of a 7-year hardware refresh, allowing you to continuously use that network with reliable hardware for one, but also hardware that with each refresh cycle increases the capacity of the network. And if we use past years as any indication, every 5 to 7 years or so, the capacity of that hardware actually increases tenfold, which gives you a real sense of how owning that fiber infrastructure gives you a straightforward path to capacity upgrades without those risks associated with what a commercial provider might be charging on a per megabit per second basis. And then finally, we've got to think about financing. There's a significant capital addition associated with building a fiber network, of course. There's a lot of ways to look at this. We kept the modeling around this fairly simple to inform some early strategic decision making. And obviously this can get more complicated as we look at particular kinds of business models, but we're assuming at this point 15-year financing terms, and we look at a range of interest rates around that. What we're not including is debt service reserves or bond issuance costs that may vary or may not be present depending on how you structure the financing. So just a snapshot of all of the costs, both the capital costs that I presented last time and what I'm calling fixed operations and maintenance, meaning relatively non-variable types of expenditures that need to be budgeted for on an annual basis. And so we're still in that same place on the outside plant construction, around $23 million. This is the conduit, the fiber optic cable installed in it, the underground vault locations where you have access to all of that conduit and fiber, all put in the ground or attached to bridges, and all of the accessories and hardware associated with that. And then we've got the new costs that you haven't seen before, which is that network integration and testing component. So this is the labor side of the network electronics, as well as the network hardware itself, the actual pieces of equipment. So in total, we're looking at about a little over $800,000 from a capital perspective to get that equipment in place. And this is, to be clear, this is really targeting those internal needs. This is not the platform from which you would provide services for all of the businesses and all of the residents within the entire Hampton Roads region, but it is a scalable one that could be incrementally and modularly upgraded to do quite a bit more than the initial business case anticipates. But at least as far as these costs go, these are really targeted very high-speed connectivity between the municipalities and to the various providers and data centers and the ISPs that would be providing you that commodity kind of service. And then the operations and maintenance costs that I just laid out, I have a little more detail for you here in the table as to what each of those looks like on an annual basis, from the fiber plant maintenance to the equipment replacement fund. And you'll notice the predominant cost in all of this really is that fiber plant maintenance. You'll have 119 miles of new fiber plant. The majority of that cost is not in repairs. It's not in really any kind of preventative maintenance function that has to occur. The fiber is a very stable, reliable, and resilient infrastructure. Most of that cost is around those utility locates. And so that's an ongoing function that, from a cost perspective, we estimate this based on contract rates. There are possibilities in which existing utility locating services or staff within some or all of the 5 cities could be augmented and potentially some of this work be done in-house. But from a business case perspective, we don't want to make assumptions around that. That hasn't been fully vetted. So we want to conservatively show you what that total cost is likely to be. So just a refresher, jumping back a bit, what do those dollar figures buy you? Again, this is the physical footprint that me and my team have been working on the detailed designs around. And actually, in terms of the services we're under contract for right now, the bulk of that is really the detailed engineering work in relation to these designs, and with your input from the last meeting, I think we have a really great footprint here, one that meets all of the potential objectives that have been updated and refined with a lot of feedback from the municipalities over the past few months. And this is the final product in relation to that. And you will, of course, be soon seeing those detailed construction plans associated with each small segment of this network. And also just a refresher as to what that conduit in the ground looks like from a capacity perspective. The entire footprint is based on 3 2-inch conduits, and this is consistent with the standard that had been arrived at the 30% design stage. We've looked at that relative to how that aligns with the needs of the communities and the anticipated uses, and we think that's a very appropriate configuration, one that balances cost and utility very well. There's one exception in the city of Chesapeake where the configuration varies a little bit, and it does so without compromising the functionality of the network, we think, and also takes advantage of tremendous cost savings. It's a very good alignment with what the city of Chesapeake is doing currently in terms of its own municipal build out. Those routes that are required for providing connectivity to their key facilities for regional points of presence and passing through for continuity of the regional network, there'll be essentially cost sharing while that work is done. Both sets of conduits will be placed together. And in those cases, we take the standard in which the regional ring has for 3 conduits and the city normally would have for 3 conduits, and consolidate that into a single 4-conduit bundle in which 2 are allocated for regional purposes, 2 are allocated for municipal purposes, and recognizing that there's some overlap in the functional purposes of each of those relative to economic development and regional and municipal needs. We believe this doesn't compromise the utility of that conduit at all, and actually provides substantial cost savings. What is important is that they will have very different purposes, both the municipal relative to the regional, and potentially different operating models associated with them. So we have built into those costs separate junction boxes or vaults or handholds. You'll probably hear me use the same term, interoperability. But what that means is that access to that actual fiber and the conduits will be separate. So although the conduits will sit side by side in the ground, they won't terminate together. They will terminate in separate junction boxes, each of which has that dedicated purpose for which it was intended. Now, the new layer that we haven't talked about in the past is the network electronics. And for those of you on the IT side of things, this will resonate with you. Otherwise, it's just a cool picture to look at. But what this shows you is an architecture, and what you should take away from this is that the fact that from day one, the equipment that's associated with those costs that you saw a moment ago provides a very robust backbone that interconnects the region together at increments of 10 gigabits and even 100 gigabit interfaces as needed. And these are all relatively low dollar amounts to get that kind of capacity relative to the commercial costs associated with leasing that kind of bandwidth from a provider. The other thing you get out of this that you generally will not from a commercial provider is equipment and physical path redundancy all the way out to the customer edge, all the way out to from the ISPs that will be located in co-location, the commercial facilities and data centers, all the way out to the core network points in each of the municipal networks. So providing a much higher degree of resiliency around in regard to protection from fiber cuts and things of that nature that could potentially take you offline, or in the case of regional public safety interoperability applications running on this network, just simply wouldn't be acceptable. So this network is designed for utmost resiliency as well as capacity. One thing that I highlight here is something happening financially in our models at this edge of the network over here where you see internet service providers. There is a cost on a recurring basis that I didn't highlight in the fixed operating costs that you do have to anticipate and that are included in our financial models. And that is the cost of commodity internet capacity. So this is the fees that you're paying to some degree, in a small degree, to the actual owner of the facility. Generally, a cross-connect fee is what they call that at the data centers to make that physical interconnection. But then on a monthly basis, you're paying the ISPs for that capacity, tying to their network and getting access to the internet. What you're not paying for is that transport piece, everything that happens on this chart from where it says internet service providers to the left. That's the part you own and that no longer you pay recurring costs for. And the difference, just to give you a sense of the magnitude of cost savings, where that cost avoidance benefit will come from, we're estimating, and I think this is fairly conservative at the type of capacity levels we're talking about, at about 25 cents per megabit per second per month. What you're paying for today, when you look at the commodity internet component, as well as the service provider's transport to bring it to you and any overhead that's associated with that and profit, that number quickly jumps to, in your case, an average of over $3. In fact, about $3.60 per megabit per second per month. So there's a lot of room in there potentially for cost avoidance. And that's really moving into our next slides here, the focus of what we're trying to capture and quantify for you with this part of the study. And I think I've talked through, that's really the essence of that first large bullet, looking for those near-term cost avoidance. We do try to look at projecting other opportunities for long-term cost avoidance, although we're not really building new applications into the calculations for regional connectivity, but it's just really important to understand that this will enable a lot of things that otherwise would require additional costs for commercial lease telecommunications services, such as public safety interoperability, meaning getting computer-aided dispatch systems for 911 operators interconnected between the jurisdictions, the radio systems that the police and fire first responders use, interconnected in a regional and interoperable way, providing mutual aid for one another in that context, and also disaster recovery, being able to physically host data and servers and applications within each other's data centers for geographic diversity of those very critical assets. Things that you wouldn't conceive of as being cost effective in a leased model, you'll now be able to do because the incremental cost to do so would be so low. And then, of course, something that's a bit out of scope for this initial business case analysis, but something we do touch on because it's an important part of what you're considering as you think about partnerships and business models, is those possibilities around revenue generation and, of course, economic development, which is less quantifiable. But on the revenue generation side of things, one thing that's very much within grasp without a lot of additional incremental operating costs is dark fiber leasing, where you would literally sell on a monthly basis or on a long-term basis access to individual strands of those fibers, potentially providing managed services for backhaul for wireline and mobile broadband service providers, potentially reaching out and providing connectivity for other anchor institutions in your region, like schools and libraries, colleges, that sort of thing. And even potentially in certain models looking more towards the possibility of providing managed services, internet connectivity for businesses. That's something that would come, though, at additional operating expense, so not truly captured in the models that we've developed here. So let's quantify, stepping back a little bit, that cost avoidance model a bit more and look at what those costs really are. Simply put, today, the aggregate expenditure across the 5 cities for internet capacity and related data center connectivity is about $50,000 a month. We're forecasting, based on feedback we've gotten and extrapolating based on those average costs that you're currently paying. And when I say near term, I mean in the next 2 years or so, at which you would start to potentially, depending on the build out schedule, actually have the construction significantly done or completed, and the ability to activate those network electronics and make that transition. You'd probably be looking at something along the lines of the costs and capacity needs that you see in the right in the chart on the right side. And so potentially doubling those costs, but that's still a relatively conservative assumption around capacity needs in the short term. And in a lot of ways, I think feedback that we get everywhere and here as well is that what you have today is based, of course, on procurements that were made in many cases a couple of years ago and multi-year contracts, and were a balance of what your needs versus what you could really afford. And near-term needs today have grown quite a bit, and so if you're looking from the context of what you could have and what you really need, it's going to look something more like what's on that right-hand side. So what ends up happening, just from a break-even perspective, if we look at total costs for ownership, total cost of ownership, essentially cumulative costs year by year of owning the regional connectivity ring and operating it with that equipment and those services, internal services in mind, forecasted against those commercial services for internet and data center transport. So that's the commercial services you see on this chart are shown in orange. It assumes, in all cases, we've assumed an 18-month fiber construction time frame. We're not including inflation in any of this. We assume inflationary forces are going to act upon the maintenance costs as well as lease service costs reasonably equivalently. And so these are all in today's dollars. We do apply a 5% annual increase in relative internet costs and capacity demand to those commercial and internal services. And we think that's very conservative, but I think it's important to look at this in the context of growing needs that in some way capture those trends from the past. So that's the commercial services are the orange line you see slowly curving upwards. The other three are three variations on the ownership model of the regional connectivity ring, looking at different financing rates. And then, of course, the gray is no financing. That assumes cash on hand, and probably the less likely version, but just demonstrating the cost of financing here as you compare those three. So in this case, it's not it doesn't provide short-term cost savings necessarily. As you can see, we have a fairly long break-even time period, 20 years or more, depending on the model. But it does trend towards eventually providing cost savings, annual cost savings earlier, of course, but long-term cumulative cost savings at some point within the lifespan of the fiber infrastructure. And again, this is only on the basis of cost avoidance, with very, very conservative assumptions around capacity needs and demands. So anything beyond that in terms of economic development, benefit to the community that's maybe a little less tangible, and certainly revenues that could be generated are effectively gravy in terms of just being on top of this in terms of improving where these various curves intersect. So we look at one of these, and I want to preface this by being very clear. This is not based on a market analysis around what demands may be or even pricing, but just to give you a market perspective around dark fiber leasing, sort of that easiest type of service to offer for revenue generation with a network like this. We look nationally and sort of on a broader regional basis, the types of models and pricing that we see. And there's really two categories of those. We have long-term and indefeasible right of use agreements. These tend to be long-term agreements, anywhere from 10 to 30 years, typically 15 or more. They generally come with an upfront payment of, we've seen a wide range of these, $1,000 to $3,000 per strand mile, is pretty typical, and that varies in the same way that real estate does. It's all about location and of course demand, as well as the supply side. In some markets, there's just a ton of fiber, and so that drives pricing down. But somewhere in there would be the range, and then those agreements typically have an annual maintenance fee associated with them that gets paid to the fiber owner of something along the lines of $250 to $350 per route mile per year, regardless of how much fiber is leased. The other type of payment structure is typically a monthly or annual lease. And these are just straightforward payments on a recurring basis per strand mile, generally per month. And they range also very widely in the $50 to $500 range, although truthfully $15 to $1,000 is the range we've seen. But those are more outlier kinds of situations on either end. So if we look at just a reasonable set of assumptions around monthly lease rates ranging from a low end of about $50 to a high end of about $150 per strand mile per month, comparing that to your costs to operate the network, both at the 1% financing and 3% financing level, we just wanted to get a sense of how much capacity on the network that we're anticipating would have to be leased in order to cover the remaining principal and interest payments on debt service and the operating and maintenance costs, less any of the cost avoidance that we talked about before. And it works out to be, regardless of the model and the price, something under about 10% of the total capacity. So to put that in strand terms, we're anticipating placing 288 strands of fiber. That's what the cost estimates are related to. So that would be 28 or less strands of fiber throughout the network. If you're able to lease that at these prices, potentially you could cover all of those ongoing operating expenses. So what does that look like when we shift the curves then with those assumptions in mind? And I picked a round number of 24 fiber strands because that tends to be in the fiber world. We think in increments of multiples of 6 or 12. It works out to be 8.33% of your fiber capacity. And so now that those authority-owned fiber curves shift downward quite a bit because they're offset now by the revenue that's coming in associated with dark fiber lease. And now we see potential break-even periods happening as soon as about 7 years and maybe out as far as about 11 years or so with a pretty modest assumption around fiber leasing revenues. So that's the summary. There's a lot more detail, obviously, in our business case analysis. But I wanted to give you that highlight here before you have the document in hand, which has been provided in draft form to the authority for your review. And I guess before we move on, are there questions, or do we want to stop for questions now? I guess I pose this maybe to Stephen, or should we kind of continue through?
Why don't we just pause for 1 second, but I'm aware that, there might be some questions that you're going to cover here shortly, but I want to, we might as well just go ahead and take a quick pause. Any questions from board members?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Jones.
Yeah, I do have some, but seeing as you're about to do the business case, I'll kind of hold it just to see if you might answer them.
Great. All right. Let's go ahead and proceed. Thank you.
No problem. All right. Well, I'll turn it over to Joanne then to lead the next part of our discussion. And Joanne, do you want me to put slides up, or did you want to drive that part? Either way works. Oh, you're on mute right now.
Apologies that I am on mute. I am about to launch us into a discussion of goals and prioritization of goals, and then potential business strategy models. So I just want to be sure that we don't lose any of those questions about what Matt has just presented, particularly if there are any of the questions of the inputs to his models and so on. If it is Okay, with the chairwoman, I also want to invite questions as I am speaking so that we are not losing. And we're going to present a lot of information. I just want to be sure we're capturing all the questions necessary. I am going to, in a moment, then share my slides, and I'm going to start with Matt. Actually, almost mine.
We just lost you for the last 10 seconds. I'm sorry, I missed what you were asking me to do. I think it was.
I'm really sorry. Please let me know if that continues to happen. I am on the road and I've been having connectivity challenges on and off this morning. Matt, if I could ask you to pull up the slides that have to do with the goals and priorities, and I'm going to speak to that, and then I will bring up the business strategy slides.
All right, you should be seeing that now.
Okay, great. So, you know, what we will share here is that I know we are not telling you anything that you don't already know when we say that there are trade-offs among goals and a need for balancing them, because maximizing one might mean potentially reducing the impact of another. And helping to, going through this process of asking you to help us understand how to prioritize your goals is a really important piece of enabling us to make some recommendations around business strategy and the various elements of that business strategy. And one way to think about the trade-off with regard to goals, benefits and risk. And benefits and risk will frequently have a relationship with each other, and that higher risk might also result in higher benefits. Less risk because of less output can also result in less benefit. But as we think about those, one way to think about it is that you've got really a bunch of different buckets of considerations. The first one is the operational internal needs of 5, and that of that is important particular project. In fact, that is one of the things. At the same time, enabling certain kinds of and other kinds of community benefits, such that may not support the desire for revenue generation to make this work, because those economic development and service availability and affordability the connectivity issue again. Are we okay?
Yeah, it did start to get choppy.
Yeah, you can a little bit choppy, but just
I'm going to switch
that last part.
I'm going to switch another network and see if that addresses the issue, and I apologize. Hi, okay. I switched to another network. How's that working? Better?
So far, so good. So far,
Okay.
so good.
All right. That was reasonably seamless, I suppose, although not ideal. So as we think about these goals and you think about economic development and service availability and affordability, the goals in that regard, maximizing those might mean losing some benefits with regard to the others, because when we're trying to enable the private sector around goals like economic development and new investment by the private sector, then making excess assets available at the lowest possible cost could maximize those goals, but at the same time could serve to reduce the revenues that are an important part of your revenue generation goals, which are deeply related to your goals for building out infrastructure and supporting the operations of the network. And this is not to say that these can't all be addressed in some way. And indeed, the vision behind the whole project is that it will address all of these goals to some degree. But I want to, I want to ask you all to be aware as we work through the models to understand that these things sometimes don't exactly align. And indeed, sometimes there are offsets in one in favor of the other. One way to think about the goals here is that there is the set of considerations that will show up on the financial statements of this effort, and that is the network itself, the costs of the network and the revenues generated by the network, as well as the cost savings that Matt has just articulated, effectively will be reflected on the financial statements of this enterprise. And then there are a bunch of other goals that are incredibly important to all of your communities and to the authority, I know, that have to do with economic development, service availability, affordability, enabling and promoting private opportunity and private investment. That set of goals and that set of benefits will not actually show up on the financial statements of the entity that you are building. And understanding those two things, I think, is one way to think about how these things play out and which ones should be prioritized. Matt, can I have the next slide, please? So as we go through this, and in light of what we've discussed and what we've learned, we've talked about an approach here for understanding the goals and determining and developing what the strategies are, financial analysis related to the strategies that are prioritized, what the inputs would be for analyzing these, and then establishing a go-forward plan. And in light of all of that, I'm going to just go close a door so you're no longer subject to the background noise that I am getting here. And then I will pull up the models deck. Thank you all for your patience with that background noise. I am on the road in South Florida, and they are very, very diligent here about cutting the grass. It feels like somebody is mowing the lawn at all hours. I try to leave the window open and the door open so I can enjoy the good weather, but the good weather comes with an enormous amount of noise. All right, I am going to share my screen now, if I may. Please let me know if you are seeing that.
Yep, we've got it.
Okay, great. What I'd like to share with you here is a range of different models. And what you can see on this particular screen is a summary of the different models that I'm going to discuss and present, and some of the considerations that are worth taking into account as we go through the process of analyzing them. I have proposed here consideration of 5 different potential ways that the authority can think about this tremendous new asset that it is developing, and the ways in which the asset could be understood to accomplish its underlying mission to support operations for the 5 cities, including this interconnection operations, realize revenues, and support the economic development and digital inclusion, digital opportunity, service opportunity that is understood. And in particular, what I've looked at here is what do we know about these models in terms of case studies out there that exist? And there are, in some cases, only one active case study. In others, there are dozens. And what do we know about what they mean in terms of additional capital cost, additional operating cost, and risk? And what do we think might be the potential here for this particular model to address some of the costs or some of the additional costs that may not be covered purely through cost savings as presented by Matt? So let me start with one that I think is quite straightforward, low risk, and I think could be of particular interest, and that is private fiber commercialization. And what this means is that in this model, the fiber project would proceed as is currently planned. You would build out the network as has been conceived, with the additional fiber capacity as has been planned for use and for leasing and for potential opportunity around that. And in the context of that additional fiber, it would then use a competitive procurement mechanism, likely an RFP or a variation on that, to select an entity, a qualified entity with capabilities to commercialize the excess fiber, such that a partner with certain kinds of capabilities around leasing, service provision, securing contracts, attracting customers, and so on, and one with a proven track record, ideally, would be awarded a contract to commercialize the excess fiber capacity on behalf of the authority and do so in a way that benefits both entities financially based on some kind of a negotiation. This is the mechanism that is currently being used by the Pennsylvania Turnpike Authority after having tested a number of other strategies that were not successful for that particular authority. But after awarding a design build contract to construct considerable fiber in Western Pennsylvania on a regional basis that was for the purposes of the Turnpike Authority's own internal needs, the Turnpike Authority then, and I'm actually anticipating my next slide, the Turnpike Authority then released an RFP to secure a private partner with the capabilities to commercialize the excess fiber within the hope and expectation that there would be at a minimum modest revenues, but the potential for considerably higher revenues over time. And certainly the potential for this excess fiber now serving as a platform for bridging what in the case of Western Pennsylvania is a rural digital divide, effectively enabling private entities to reach places with middle mile fiber that they could not otherwise reach, and providing the potential for new deployment by the private sector, branching off of the authority's owned fiber. A competitive procurement resulted in what is believed to be a very advantageous contract, a win-win contract. And this strategy is now being tested on this large regional basis. I am actually a fan of this strategy. I think that, as you can see in my summary, I believe it's quite low risk. An RFP is a very low risk way to test the market, and assuming that the market is up to the test, to secure a highly advantageous contract that maximizes the benefits of competition. This kind of commercialization opportunity likely would involve no additional capital cost and no additional operating cost, because the commercialization partner would take on the ongoing costs of marketing, sales, billing, collections, if that becomes a consideration, interaction with the customers for the fiber assets, as well as the efforts around determining what services are to be offered, if any, other than dark fiber, and offering of those fiber, of those services. The additional capital cost would be negligible, because the additional capital costs where necessary to connect to a given customer would be something that the commercialization partner would take on. I think at least for testing the interests of the market in this kind of model, and the interests of the market in the asset that is being built, this is a low risk and attractive means of proceeding. That's the first model. The second model that I would bring to your attention is something that is known as a concessionaire model, or a concession. And forgive me if I'm telling you all things that you already know, but the concessionaire model is sometimes what is referred to as the P3 model. And in broadband planning, we use the term P3, or public-private partnership, to describe a wide range of different kinds of collaboration between public and private entities. But the term P3, public-private partnership, frequently has a very specific meaning under state law. And it is, and sometimes it's public-public, by the way, sometimes it's private-private, but the concessionaire model is generally what is meant when that term is used as a term of art. And what a concession would be in the case of broadband is just effectively that the sponsoring entity awards a long-term contract to a partner who takes on the entirety of the effort to design, build, finance, maintain, and operate that asset over some period of time. Effectively a concession to undertake the entirety of the effort. And the insight behind this model is frequently the idea that one or more private entities working together in consortium bring to the table certain kinds of private sector capabilities, expertise, and efficiencies that can be leveraged through a concession to potentially deliver design, construction, financing, although I'll come back to that in a moment, maintenance and operations, including the commercialization piece, the revenue generation piece, to do so in a way that is presumed, at least the theory goes, going to be more efficient than when done by a public entity or a quasi-public entity. That's the idea behind this. Now, let me kind of express my concerns about the reality of this concession model. It is interesting and can be quite attractive, particularly for public sponsors or project sponsors who would like to do high-level oversight and management of a contract with a single entity and have that entity handle all of the execution day-to-day, but also not just day-to-day, but the high-level execution as well. For a more engaged and involved entity, such as yours, this kind of concession of handing over the majority of the responsibility to a partner may not be in any way necessary. In fact, I'm thinking it probably is not. But this is very attractive for some communities, states, cities, consortia, where they would rather not have any oversight or operational role at all, other than just high-level oversight of the contract with their partner.